I thought my boss trusted me, until the envelope he gave me turned into a death sentence. What I uncovered in those 48 hours changed my life forever. Greg Marshall believed he knew everything about pressure, deadlines, chaotic meetings, and the ruthless atmosphere inside Vanguard Crest, the most cutthroat financial consultancy in the city. But nothing prepared him for the morning when his boss, George Kensington, called him into his office with a quiet, unsettling smile. George never smiled. His face normally looked like a brick wall, cold, flat, impossible to read. But that morning, under the soft hum of the office AC and the distant tapping of keyboards, George smiled like a man who had already won. "Greg," he said, tapping a beige envelope on his table. "Close the door." Greg did. He swallowed. He stood. George slid the envelope forward. "You have 48 hours. A chill stabbed through Greg's spine. "What?" Greg reached for the envelope, but George placed his palm on it, pinning it down like evidence. "Before you open it," George said softly, "I need you to know something. Every empire is built on decisions. Hard decisions. And you, Greg Marshall, are about to make yours." Greg's heartbeat thickened. "Sir, is this about the audit?" "No." "Is it about the new project?" "No." "Then what is it?" "A test," George whispered. "Your future." He released the envelope. Greg opened it with trembling fingers. Inside was a single line. "Eliminate the problem. 48 hours. No signature. No instructions. No clarification. Just a sentence that sounded like either a threat or a command. Greg blinked. "This is a joke, right?" George's smile did not move. "You're smart," he said. "You'll figure out who the problem is. And you'll handle it. Or—" He gestured toward the window overlooking the city, tall buildings, corporate kings, and thousands of hopeful workers who could replace him in seconds. "Or the problem will eliminate you." Greg's world falls apart. Greg staggered out of the office, envelope in hand, ears ringing. "Everything okay?" That was Miriam, his closest friend in the office. Sharp jawline, sharp wit, soft heart. She had helped him survive the toxic workplace for the last 3 years. Greg forced a smile. "Yeah, just George being George." Miriam frowned. "Your hands are shaking." He shoved the envelope into his pocket. "I'll explain later." But he never did, not yet. Because while Greg struggled to understand what "eliminate the problem" meant, trouble was already forming. That afternoon, he received a call. Unknown number. He answered. A distorted voice spoke. 47 hours. The line cut. Greg stood frozen in the hallway, the fluorescent lights flickering above him like warning signs. A message from the past. Greg left work early, chest tight, mind spinning. At home, he opened his laptop, typed George's name, and searched deeper into his background. Rumors. Whispers. Disappearing competitors. Employees fired after discovering too much. But the most disturbing thing he found was an old article from 12 years ago. Young analyst disappears after alleging fraud at Kensington Corporation. Name, Raymond Dale. Raymond. Greg recognized the name. His older sister, Clara, had dated a Raymond in university. Could it be the same man? Almost as if summoned by his thoughts, Greg's phone buzzed. A message from Clara. "Greg, we need to talk. It's about Raymond." His breath froze. Raymond wasn't dead. Raymond wasn't missing. Raymond was alive. And apparently, he had something Greg desperately needed to know. The meeting at Brookside Diner. Greg met Clara at a quiet diner at 10 p.m. She sat by the window, eyes wide, fingers trembling around a cup of untouched tea. "You look scared," Greg said. "I am." She pulled a folded paper from her purse. Raymond sent this to me yesterday. It was a photograph. George Kensington, standing with a group of suited men. Behind him was a whiteboard with financial charts, and a small note scribbled in red marker. 48-hour protocol. Greg's stomach nodded. What does that mean? Clara swallowed. Raymond said George is involved in something illegal. Something dangerous. They call it Project Atlas. Anyone who discovers the truth becomes the problem. And George removes the problem before it spreads. Greg felt the envelope burning in his pocket. Raymond said. Clara whispered. That you're next. Greg leaned back, dizzy. So George wasn't testing him. George was warning him. The envelope wasn't an order. It was a countdown to Greg's destruction. Unless he acted first. As they left the diner, a figure stepped from behind a parked car. A man in a long gray coat, hood up. Greg pushed Clara behind him. What do you want? The man raised his hand slowly. I'm here to help. He removed his hood. Greg gasped. Raymond? He looked older, thinner, hunted, but alive. You have 46 hours, Raymond said quietly. And George already set the trap. What trap? The kind you don't walk away from. Greg grabbed his arm. Tell me everything. Now! Raymond nodded. I will. But not here. They're already watching. The truth about Project Atlas. They met in an abandoned parking lot behind an old textile warehouse. The air smelled of rust and rain. Raymond leaned against a broken pillar, breathing heavily. George runs a covert financial laundering system. Offshore accounts. Illegal transfers. Manipulated trades. Billions disappearing from client portfolios. Greg was stunned. But why kill me? Because you were close to discovering it without knowing. Raymond exhaled shakily. You asked too many questions. You reviewed the wrong data sets. You flagged too many anomalies. George noticed. Greg felt hollow. So what do I do? Raymond handed him a flash drive. Expose him. How? You're not alone, Raymond whispered. You have allies. People inside Vanguard Crest who want him gone. Who? Raymond smiled faintly. Miriam. Greg froze. Miriam. She's been investigating George for months. She just didn't want to involve you until she was sure you weren't working for him. Greg's world flipped. Miriam knew. The whole time. She knew. Find her, Raymond said. You only have. A gunshot sliced the air. Raymond collapsed. Greg screamed. Clara screamed. A black SUV screeched around the corner. George's men. Greg dragged Clara behind a concrete block as bullets shattered the darkness. Raymond lay motionless, blood pooling beneath him. Greg felt something break inside him. George had taken everything. That was the moment Greg stopped being afraid and started planning revenge. The clock is running. The parking lot was silent except for Clara's shaking breath and the distant hum of retreating engines. Rain dripped from the broken ceiling panels above, tapping steadily against the ground like a second hand ticking on a bomb. Greg knelt beside Raymond's body, hands trembling as he pressed his fingers to Raymond's neck. Nothing. A dull emptiness spread through Greg's chest. Raymond had risked everything to warn him. And paid with his life. Clara crouched beside him, tears streaming down her face. Greg, we have to go, if they come back. Greg didn't speak. He didn't cry. He didn't even blink. His silence was colder than the night around them. He took the flash drive Raymond had risked so much to deliver. Then he closed Raymond's eyes. We're not running anymore, Greg said quietly. A sentence that sounded nothing like the man he had been just a day ago. We're fighting. Greg and Clara drove in silence toward the city, headlights slicing through the misty night. Clara clutched her seatbelt tightly, as she glanced at her brother's rigid expression. "What's the plan?" she whispered. Greg didn't answer immediately. He saw George's smug smile in his mind. The envelope. The threat. The countdown. "Clara," Greg said finally, voice low. "George wants me gone in less than 48 hours. And he already took someone who tried to help me. I can't run. If I disappear, he comes after you. After everyone. So what do? We take his power away." "How?" Clara pressed. Greg breathed out slowly. "We expose him. We bring every piece of dirt into the light. We destroy his empire from the inside." Clara swallowed hard. "That sounds dangerous." Greg nodded. "It is." Clara looked at him with a mix of fear and pride. "You've changed," she whispered. Greg's jaw clenched. "He forced me to." Miriam's revelation. At 1:13 a.m., Greg knocked on Miriam's apartment door. She opened it wearing sweatpants and a hoodie, her hair tied up, glasses perched on her nose. Typical Miriam working through the night mode. She froze when she saw Greg's face. "You're hurt." His shirt was splattered with dried blood. His hands were shaking. "What happened?" she demanded. Greg stepped inside and closed the door behind him. "Raymond is dead." Miriam dropped her glasses. "What?" "They shot him. They were watching us. They followed him." Miriam covered her mouth, her voice cracking. No, he promised me he was staying hidden." Greg narrowed his eyes. "You knew? You knew he was alive this whole time?" Miriam hesitated, then nodded. "He contacted me 6 months ago. Said he had evidence. Said he needed help bringing George down. I didn't tell you because George had started watching you. I didn't want you getting caught in the crossfire. Well, I'm in it now," Greg said bitterly. Miriam sank onto her couch, visibly shaken. "I can't believe he's gone." Greg sat across from her, leaning forward. "Miriam, I need to know everything. What did Raymond find?" Miriam wiped her tears, straightened herself, and her usual fire returned. "Project Atlas," she said. "The most illegal financial laundering system I've ever seen. Offshore accounts. Fake clients. Embezzled government funds. There's enough evidence to put George away for life. Where is it?" "That flash drive in your hand," she said softly. Greg's eyes widened. "So Raymond got it out." "Not all of it," Miriam said, voice tightening. "Just enough to expose the main structure. But the full files, the real evidence, are inside Vanguard Crest's internal server. And George keeps it locked behind a multi-layer firewall." Greg exhaled sharply. "And we can break it?" "We can," Miriam said. "But if George catches us, we disappear." Greg stared at the flash drive. Raymond gave his life for this. "I'm doing it," Greg said. "I'm with you," Miriam replied. Clara, who had been standing quietly near the door, stepped forward. "So am I." Miriam blinked. "Clara, it's too dangerous." "He killed someone we knew," Clara snapped. "He tried to threaten my brother. I'm not staying out of this." Greg put a hand on her shoulder. "Okay," he said. "But you both follow my lead." For the first time that night, Miriam smiled faintly. "Since when did you start giving orders?" "Since George declared war." The blueprint of revenge. Miriam rolled out a set of blueprints and server maps on her dining table. "George's office has a private network access port hidden under his desk. Only he uses it. If we plug the flash drive into that port, it automatically extracts every incriminating file from Project Atlas." Clara frowned. "So we break into George's office?" "Not exactly," Miriam said. "We walk in like we belong there." Greg raised an eyebrow. "At 2 in the morning?" Miriam smirked. That's when the night security shift changes. 2 guards leave, 1 arrives. For 5 minutes, the entire floor is almost unmonitored. You've done this before, Clara muttered. Miriam shrugged. George didn't hire me for my typing speed. Greg studied the blueprint. What about cameras? I can loop them for exactly 8 minutes, Miriam replied. After that, the recordings resume normally. 8 minutes is enough, Greg said. Miriam added, but there's a catch. Greg tensed. What is it? Once the extraction begins, it triggers a silent internal alert inside George's system. He'll know someone breached the files. How fast will he respond? Miriam's lips thinned. Instantly. So we have 8 minutes to get in, and maybe 2 minutes to get out before George arrives? Clara asked. More or less, Miriam said. Greg nodded slowly. That's enough. The night he became someone else. They prepared in silence. Miriam tied her hair into a tight ponytail and grabbed her laptop. Clara changed into dark clothes and stuffed her phone and a pocket flashlight into her jacket. Greg slipped the flash drive into his inner pocket and stared at himself in the mirror. Yesterday, he was just an employee. Today, he was a target. Tomorrow, he might be a criminal, but only because his boss had turned him into one. He whispered to himself, This ends tonight. Vanguard crest at night. The building stood tall and silent against the night sky. Its glass windows reflected the moonlight like the cold eyes of a predator. Miriam led them through the underground parking lot. She seemed to know every blind spot, every guard route, every timing. At exactly 2:04 a.m., the east elevator dinged open. Cameras looping, Miriam whispered. We're invisible for 8 minutes. They stepped in. The elevator rose with a soft hum. Greg's heart pounded. Clara's breathing was shallow. Miriam's fingers danced over her tablet as she monitored the camera feed manipulation. When the door opened on the 32nd floor, the office was pitch dark. George's empire. Silent. Waiting. Let's go, Greg said, entering the dragon's lair. They moved quickly. Past the boardroom. Past the glass cubicles. Past the trophy wall filled with fake awards. George's office door stood tall at the end of the corridor. Greg reached for the handle. It clicked. Unlocked. Miriam froze. That's not normal, she whispered. George always locks his office. Greg pushed the door open slowly. The room was dark. Too dark. Greg stepped inside. Then he noticed it. A small red light blinking on George's desk. Clara gasped. A camera! Miriam cursed under her breath. He installed a hidden surveillance system. Greg went pale. Miriam, how long until the camera feed updates? About 60 seconds. Then we only have one choice, Greg said. He stepped into the office completely. We continue? Miriam swallowed. Greg, if George is watching, he won't catch us, Greg said. Not before we take everything from him. The breach. The red surveillance light blinked steadily in the darkness, like a mechanical heartbeat. Greg stepped farther into George's office, each footstep quiet yet heavy with the possibility of everything going horribly wrong. Miriam's hands flew across her tablet. I'm trying to delay the hidden camera feed, she whispered. I can scramble it for maybe 30 seconds, 60 if I'm lucky. Greg nodded. That's enough. Enough for what? Clara whispered anxiously. To steal the truth, Greg said. The desk of secrets. George's office was a shrine to arrogance. Mahogany desk. Leather chairs. A massive portrait of himself hanging behind the desk, arms crossed, jaw tight, like a dictator carved into oil paint. Miriam knelt under the desk. Found it, the private access port. She brushed aside a panel, revealing a small metallic slot hidden behind a bundle of wires. "This is it," she whispered. Greg pulled out the flash drive. Raymond's flash drive. His last act. The final evidence he died protecting. Greg stared at it for a moment. "Let's finish what he started." He slid it into the port. A soft beep echoed through the office. Miriam's tablet lit up. "It's extracting all of Project Atlas. Every hidden file. Every offshore account. Every illegal transaction." Greg exhaled. "How long?" 1 minute 30 seconds, she said. "After that, we run." Clara paced near the window, nerves visibly shaking her. "Are we sure George isn't already watching?" "That depends," Miriam murmured, "on how paranoid he is." The red camera light blinked, once, twice, then froze. Miriam looked up sharply. "Oh no!" Greg tensed. "What?" "The hidden camera feed just unfroze," Clara gasped. "Meaning," Miriam swallowed, "meaning George Kensington is watching us right now." The call. Greg's phone vibrated. Unknown number. He answered with trembling fingers. George's calm, venomous voice filled the room. "Greg, I'm disappointed." Greg's breath froze in his throat. "You broke into my office," George continued. "You tampered with my assets, and you somehow found that little toy Raymond stole before he disappeared. Quite bold." Greg's jaw tightened. "You killed him." "No," George said casually. "My men removed a threat. Like I told you, Greg, every empire requires eliminating problems. You should appreciate the concept by now." Greg's voice was ice. "And I'm the next problem?" "Oh, Greg," George laughed softly. "You're not the next problem. You were always the main problem." Clara grabbed Greg's arm in fear. Miriam mouthed, "Stall him." Greg took a deep breath. "You think you can kill everyone who knows the truth?" "History favors the bold," George replied smugly. "You broke into my office, Greg. You have, 50 seconds left before the police arrive to arrest you for corporate espionage?" Greg's eyes widened. Clara's knees buckled slightly. Miriam whispered urgently, "The extraction is at 40%. Buy more time." Greg gripped the phone tightly. "You called the police?" "No, Greg," George said. "I called someone much worse." Greg's heart dropped. "What do you mean?" Suddenly, a thud echoed from somewhere in the building. The lights flickered. Miriam's head snapped up. "Oh no, not him!" Greg frowned. "Him?" Miriam whispered a name that made Greg's skin crawl. "Ellis." Greg turned cold. "Detective Ellis? The corrupt one from the Raymond case?" Clara stammered. "But he disappeared. Years ago." Miriam nodded grimly. "He didn't disappear. George hired him." George's voice returned smoothly through the phone. "Detective Ellis is on his way up, and he enjoys his job, perhaps a little too much." Then the line went dead. The race against the elevator. "Extraction at 55%, Miriam whispered, panic creeping into her voice. Clara rushed to the door and peered through the office glass. Then she screamed, "The elevator is moving!" Miriam slammed her tablet. "He's overriding the building system. Ellis is coming straight to this floor." Greg's heart pounded so hard it felt like it was trying to break out of his chest. "How long until he gets here?" 40 seconds. "And extraction?" 1 minute 15. Greg cursed under his breath. "We need to buy time," he said. His tone wasn't panicked. It was controlled, determined. Greg grabbed George's leather chair and wedged it under the door handle, barricading it. Clara dragged the small metal trash bin and jammed it under the hinge. Miriam smashed the light switch, plunging the office into darkness. "Camera feed is still live," she whispered. "But if he can't see clearly, he might hesitate." Hesitate. not stop. Ellis never stopped. The arrival of the predator. The elevator dinged. A heavy footstep echoed down the hallway. Slow. Deliberate. Predatory. Clara whispered, voice trembling. Greg, what do we do if he... Stay behind me, Greg said. Miriam crouched under the desk, trying to stabilize the extraction. Extraction at 78%. Please, please, please. A shadow approached George's office. A deep, gravelly voice sounded from behind the door. Well, well. Breaking and entering, huh? Detective Ellis. His voice was heavy, like gravel grinding against steel. Greg Marshall, Ellis growled. Step away from the desk. Greg said nothing. Ellis knocked once. Hard. Open the door, kid. Make this easy on yourself. Greg stayed silent. Clara covered her mouth. Miriam whispered, 90%, almost there. Ellis laughed. Oh, stubborn are we? George said you'd be trouble. He jiggled the handle. The barricade held. Then Ellis spoke in a tone that was disturbingly casual. You know, doors are just suggestions. A second later. Bang! He kicked the door with enough force to shake the entire floor. Clara jumped. Greg clenched his fists. Ellis kicked again. Bang! The chair cracked. Bang! The top hinge snapped. Miriam's trembling whisper. 99%. Ellis kicked one last time. Crash! The door burst open. The chair skidded across the office. Detective Ellis stepped in. He was massive. Broad shoulders. Dark coat. Cold, dead eyes. He cracked his knuckles. Field trips over, kids! The last second, Ellis lunged for Greg. Clara screamed. Miriam shouted, Done! Extraction complete. Greg grabbed the flash drive from the port. Ellis reached for him. Greg rolled under the desk, grabbed Miriam's arm, pulled her up, and shouted, Run! Clara sprinted behind them. Ellis roared, Get back here! Greg kicked the toppled door into Ellis's legs, making him stumble. They raced down the hallway. Ellis regained balance and charged after them. Miriam pressed her tablet. I'm turning off the lights. The entire floor went pitch dark. Ellis cursed behind them, slamming into a filing cabinet. Greg dragged the others into the emergency stairwell. We're not taking the elevator, he panted. He'll trap us. They bolted down the stairs, hearts pounding, breaths ragged. Above them, Ellis tore the stairwell door open and thundered after them. Floor by floor, step by step, a monster hunting them. The fall of fear. The stairwell echoed with pounding footsteps. 3 terrified hearts racing downward. One monstrous shadow charging after them. Greg held the flash drive tightly, the plastic edges digging into his palm. Raymond's last hope. Their only weapon. Faster! Miriam gasped, clutching the railing as she leaped down the stairs. Clara stumbled, nearly slipping. Greg grabbed her wrist. I've got you! Keep moving! Above them, Detective Ellis's voice boomed through the stairwell. You can run, but you won't leave this building. The man didn't sound out of breath. That made him even more terrifying. Greg, Miriam whispered while running. He's not coming after us to arrest us. He wants to silence us. Greg answered without turning around. Then we don't let him. The trap below. As they descended to the 28th floor, Greg spotted something that made his heart stop. A red laser dot flicked across the wall. Sniper. Clara screamed. Down! A bullet shattered the metal railing a few inches from Greg's head. The sniper wasn't far. He was inside the building. Ellis roared above them. Don't kill the man! Just the girl. Clara's breath hitched. Why me? Miriam shouted. Because you're leverage. Another shot. Then another. Ping. Ping. Greg's instincts kicked in. Up the stairs, he yelled. Back up. Go, go, go. Miriam froze. Up? Toward Ellis. He won't shoot upward, Greg said. Not with Ellis chasing us. Clara needed no more convincing. They bolted back up the stairs, passing the 30th, 31st. Greg heard the sniper load another round. He pushed Clara and Miriam upward. Just one more floor. 32. Their floor. They burst through the stairwell door and back into the dark office hallway. Behind them. Boom! Ellis slammed into the stairwell door below. He was close. Too close. The office was pitch dark, but Greg's eyes adjusted enough to see the emergency exit sign glowing faintly ahead. We need the roof, he said. Miriam blinked. The roof? Why? Because we're trapped, Greg said, and he wants a straight chase. So let's give him anything but straight. Clara shook her head violently. Greg, that's crazy. Crazy got us this far, he said. Alice's footsteps thundered closer. They sprinted down the hall. Miriam reached the steel door that led up to the rooftop access. She typed a code into the keypad. The light turned green. They pushed through. Cold night wind slapped their faces. The rooftop stretched before them. Metal railings, ventilation units, and the distant glow of the city spreading beneath them like a sea of broken stars. Greg slammed the door shut behind them and wedged a loose concrete block under the handle. Bang! Alice hit the door from the other side. Clara hugged herself. He's going to break through. Greg scanned the rooftop. We need leverage. What kind of leverage? Miriam asked. A way to slow him down. He jogged toward the side ledge and peered down. 3 security patrols walked the compound below. Not helpful. Then he saw it. A maintenance crane stretching across part of the roof like a giant metal spine. The base was bolted but the arm. The arm was loose. Greg turned back. Miriam, help me. They ran to the crane, and Greg used all his strength to push its heavy arm across the rooftop. The metal groaned loudly. What are you doing? Clara demanded. Setting a trap. The monster breaks through. The rooftop door buckled. Then, crash! The concrete block skidded across the roof. The door burst open. Detective Ellis stepped out, breathing heavily but smiling. There you are, he growled, cracking his knuckles. Greg moved in front of Clara and Miriam. Ellis stepped closer. Hand me the drive, kid. I might let the girls walk away. Greg smirked. You don't even know which of us has it. Ellis shrugged. Doesn't matter. George only needs your hands broken. He can search the pieces. Clara whimpered. Greg shifted into a defensive stance he hadn't used in years. Since the night he fought off 3 muggers at a train station. Ellis lunged forward. Greg dodged left. Ellis grabbed him by the collar and threw him against the rooftop railing. Air exploded from Greg's lungs. Clara screamed. Miriam rushed forward. Ellis backhanded her so hard she crashed into a metal vent. Greg saw red. He pushed himself up, stumbling. Ellis cracked his neck. You're nothing, Greg. George gives men like you jobs out of pity. Greg spat blood. Funny, he treats you the same way. Ellis charged. Greg ducked, and the detective slammed full speed into the crane's metal arm. Clang! It knocked him sideways. Greg grabbed the crane lever he'd loosened earlier. Hey, Ellis. Ellis spun toward him. Greg yanked the lever. Whoosh! The crane arm swung wildly. Right into Ellis. The impact lifted him off his feet. He hit the ground hard, rolling toward the rooftop's edge. He clawed at the concrete. Greg ran toward him. Clara screamed. Greg, don't get close. Alice grabbed Greg's ankle. Greg lost balance and fell to his knees. Alice's voice was a snarl. "We die together." Greg kicked him, and Alice's grip slipped. The detective slid over the edge. For a terrifying second, he hung suspended in the wind. Then he fell. The night swallowed him. Silence. Clara fell to her knees, shaking violently. Miriam touched her forehead, blood. Greg held the railing, chest heaving. Everything inside him trembled. He didn't celebrate. He didn't smile. He felt nothing but the weight of what came next. Miriam limped toward him. "Greg, we have the files. We can go to the authorities now." Greg shook his head slowly. "No." Clara stared at him. "What do you mean, no?" Greg turned toward the stairwell door, where Ellis had come from. "George controls the police, the city, the media. If we go to the authorities now, he'll bury the evidence and bury us with it." Miriam swallowed. "Then what's the plan?" Greg looked at the flash drive in his hand, then at the glowing city below them. The wind whipped around him. He spoke quietly, but with a darkness that hadn't been in him before. "We don't give the evidence to them." He turned, face hardening. "We release it publicly." Clara gasped. Miriam's eyes widened. "Greg, that will destroy George." He nodded. "That's the point." The air inside the abandoned customs warehouse felt colder than outside, as if the concrete walls absorbed every scream ever made within them. Greg's flashlight beam cut lazily through drifting dust, illuminating rusted containers, broken forklifts, and a long track of tire marks leading deeper inside. Miriam stepped beside him, silence crawling between them like something alive. "You sure this is where the shipment was offloaded?" she whispered. Greg nodded. "This is the only warehouse not listed on any official manifest. George used ghost docks. Anything he didn't want traced." Miriam exhaled shakily, hugging herself. "Feels like the walls are watching us." "Good," Greg said darkly. "Let them watch." They walked deeper in. Each step echoed off metal. Each heartbeat sharpened. Greg could feel it, the story written between these walls. The lies. The cover-ups. The secrets George had buried. Then, something crackled. A metal latch snapped shut behind them. Greg spun around instantly. The giant sliding door had closed. And standing in the shadows, at the catwalk above, was the last person he expected. Alfred Kuda, George's personal auditor. His shadow. A man who spoke as little as a stapler, but saw everything. He leaned over the railing casually, arms folded. "Gregory," Alfred called down. "Still chasing ghosts, I see." Miriam stiffened. "What do you want, Alfred?" He gave a calm smile, the kind that didn't reach the eyes. "Mr. George asked me to deliver a message." Greg stepped forward. "Where is he?" "Oh, around," Alfred replied, tapping the railing. "But he said you would eventually find this place. Curiosity is your greatest weakness. You dig until you hit the coffin." "Good," Greg said. "I hope he's inside that coffin." Alfred chuckled softly. "Ah, still emotional. Still impulsive. No wonder you were easy to manipulate." Greg's jaw clenched. "Open the door." "No." "Then you open it the hard way." At that, Alfred straightened, pulling something from his blazer pocket. Not a gun. Not a knife. Something worse. A USB stick with a bright red label. Greg recognized it instantly. The security clearance pattern of the company's internal server. "George wants you to see something," Alfred said. "Something you missed." He tossed the USB down. It skittered across the floor, landing by Greg's boot. "Go on," Alfred added. "Open it. It's safer than you think." Greg hesitated. Miriam whispered, "Don't touch it." But Greg did. because Alfred was not the kind of man who made empty gestures. He plugged it into the tablet he carried. A file auto-launched. It was a video. Dated 2 years ago. Greg froze. The footage showed a boardroom, the executive conference room on the 11th floor. Around the table sat George, Alfred, and various department heads. Greg watched his younger self enter the room, unaware he was late to a meeting he had never been invited to. George stood to greet him, shaking his hand warmly. But the audio told the truth Greg never knew. George, he's perfect. Naive. Loyal. He'll take the fall without asking too many questions. A woman's voice chimed in, the former HR director. HR. Does he even know he's signing falsified documents? George. That's the beauty of it. He trusts me blindly. By the time he realizes anything, the trail will point straight to him. Greg's chest tightened. His hands trembled. Miriam covered her mouth. Oh my God, they planned it. Alfred's voice floated down calmly. Every accusation against you was orchestrated. Every document planted. Every signature forged using your digital key. You were always the escape route. Greg's world spun. His heartbeat crashed against his ribs. His entire life, destroyed not by accident, but by design. Why show me this? Greg's voice cracked. Because you needed to know, Alfred replied simply. George was right. You were the perfect scapegoat. Greg stepped forward, face darkening. And you? What were you? Alfred shrugged. A facilitator. You're a snake. A very well-paid snake, Alfred corrected. Miriam shouted upward. Where is George? Alfred leaned forward slightly. That depends on whether Greg wants revenge or closure. Greg's breath stopped. Miriam grabbed his arm. Don't listen. He's manipulating you. It's what they do. I know, Greg whispered. But he also knew something else. Alfred never moved without purpose. What do you want, Alfred? Greg demanded. Alfred smiled faintly. To switch sides. Greg blinked hard. You want to help us? No, Alfred said. I want to survive. George is about to burn the entire company to cover his tracks. I'm not dying for him. Greg's fists curled. Then why trap us inside this warehouse? Alfred nodded once sharply. Because footsteps echoed from the far side of the building. Heavy. Uniformed. Armed. Greg tensed. Who's that? Alfred's voice sharpened. Those are the men George hired to dispose of all evidence. Including you. Miriam backed up quickly. Greg. He held her behind him. Alfred raised his hands. If you want to live, follow the emergency shaft behind container 14B. It leads to the drainage tunnel. Greg frowned. And why help us escape? Alfred smirked coldly. Because I'm going to give you George myself. Before Greg could answer, gunfire cracked through the warehouse. Alfred dubbed behind the railing. Greg grabbed Miriam and sprinted toward the containers as bullets shredded the metal around them. The warehouse exploded into chaos. Shouting. Running. Ricochets sparking. Dust clouds rising like ghosts. Greg pushed Miriam behind a stack of crates. Stay low. She nodded, trembling. More footsteps thundered toward them. 3 men in all-black tactical gear, faces masked, rifles raised. Greg darted behind another pillar, scanning for anything useful. He spotted a long steel rod. Not a weapon, but better than bare hands. The gunmen spread out. One approached Miriam's hiding place. Greg's blood ran cold. He moved fast. One heartbeat. One decision. As the gunman turned toward Miriam, Greg swung the steel rod with everything he had. Crack. The man collapsed instantly. The others reacted, firing wildly. Greg grabbed Miriam's hand. Go, go! They slid between crates, crawling toward container 14B. Bullets chased them. Metal screamed. Adrenaline blurred the edges of reality. They reached the container, its back corner slightly open, revealing a hidden ladder descending into darkness. Greg climbed down first. "Miriam, hurry!" She followed, shaking. Above them, boots landed at the container's entrance. But before the men could fire, a single clean gunshot rang out. Silence. Then another body hit the floor. Alfred's voice echoed faintly. "I said I'm switching sides." The hatch slammed shut. Darkness swallowed them. Only Greg's ragged breathing filled the narrow shaft. "Are you okay?" he whispered. Miriam nodded weakly. "I will be, once this nightmare ends." Greg held her hand tightly. "It ends tonight." They descended deeper into the shadows. The ladder led them down almost 40 feet before Greg's boots touched damp concrete. A thin stench of diesel, rust, and stagnant water crawled into his lungs. The tunnel was narrow, no more than a meter wide, with large drainage pipes running along the sides. Emergency lights glowed faintly every 20 meters, turning the darkness into a sequence of dim, sickly orange pockets. Miriam dropped down beside him, her breathing unsteady but controlled. "Where does this lead?" she whispered. Greg pointed down the tunnel. "Toward the old drainage outlet behind the shipping yard. If Alfred is telling the truth, it's our only way out. And if he's lying?" Greg exhaled, jaw clenching. "Then we die underground." They pushed forward, footsteps crunching on gravel and loose bolts. Every sound seemed magnified. The low hum of water flowing beneath the metal grates. The distant echo of machinery. Their breathing, shaky and fast. After several minutes, Miriam spoke softly. "Greg, you okay?" "No," he admitted. "But I'm alive. And that's more than George planned for." Miriam nodded, eyes glistening. "I hate that he tricked you. That he used you." Greg's voice hardened. "He didn't just use me. He built an empire on my name, then threw me off the cliff." They kept walking. Eventually, they reached a metal door with peeling blue paint. Greg tried the handle. Locked. He scanned the tunnel walls, found a loose pipe bracket, and ripped it off with brute force. After 3 heavy strikes, the lock snapped, the metal door creaking open. Cold night air washed over them. They stepped out into an isolated corner of the shipping yard, where towering stacks of containers stood like silent giants under the moonlight. The yard was quiet, almost too quiet. Miriam scanned the surroundings nervously. "What now?" Greg pointed toward the far perimeter. "We head for the fence. Once we're outside." A slow clap broke the silence. Greg and Miriam spun around instantly. Standing in the open, leaning casually against a container, was a man in a gray designer coat, sleeves rolled, as if he had just finished a glass of scotch rather than ordering an execution. George. His expression held disappointment, mixed with amusement. "I must say," George drawled, "you're far more persistent than I anticipated." Miriam stepped back instinctively. Greg's fists clenched. "You finally crawled out from behind your henchmen." George raised a brow. "Please. They're not henchmen. They're employees. Very expensive employees you knocked unconscious, by the way." "Where's Alfred?" Greg demanded. George smiled coldly. "Reconsidering his life choices, I imagine. He'll answer for his betrayal." Greg stepped forward. "This ends tonight." "Oh, it does," George said. "Just not in the way you think." He reached into his coat pocket. Greg tensed. But George slowly pulled out a small black envelope. He tossed it at Greg's feet. Greg didn't move. George smirked. "Aren't you going to open it?" "No." "You should," George insisted lightly. "It's about you." Miriam shook her head urgently. "Greg, don't." But he picked it up, eyes locked on George. He opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper. A memo written on company letterhead. Greg's name at the top. Below it, 3 cold words. Termination, effective immediately. Greg's jaw tightened. You think firing me matters after everything you've done? George chuckled. It's symbolic, Gregory. I'm severing the last string tying you to me. After tonight, you will be nobody. No employment history. No references. Your account's frozen. Your identity flagged. You will vanish. And even if you scream the truth, no one will hear you. Greg's vision blurred with rage. You destroyed my career, my reputation, my life. Collateral damage, George said with a shrug. You were useful until you weren't. Then why didn't you kill me earlier? Greg growled. George gave a thin, predatory smile. Because watching you unravel has been entertaining. Miriam's voice cracked as she stepped forward. You're a monster. George tilted his head slightly. Perhaps. But monsters run the world. He snapped his fingers. From behind the containers, the remaining 2 armed men emerged, rifles raised. Miriam froze. Greg stepped in front of her. Last words? George asked softly, as if offering a polite courtesy. Yes, Greg said. George raised a brow. Go on. Greg smiled, slow, cold, and knowing. You should have killed Alfred when you had the chance. George's face twitched, just slightly. And then, a gunshot cracked from above. George's right-hand guard collapsed instantly, dropping like a puppet with its strings cut. George spun in shock. Alfred stood atop a container with a suppressed pistol, his suit disheveled, face smeared with blood. George, he called down. You always did underestimate loyalty. Greg didn't waste the opening. He grabbed Miriam. Run! Gunfire exploded across the yard. Alfred firing from above, George's second guard shooting wildly, bullets sparking off metal. Miriam sprinted beside Greg. George shouted orders, voice cracking with fury. Stop them! Stop them! Greg and Miriam weaved between containers, ducking shots. Alfred's voice echoed from above. Go! I'll hold him. A single loud gunshot cut him off. Miriam gasped. Alfred! Greg didn't look back. He couldn't. Not now. They reached the perimeter fence, barbed wire glinting under the moon. Greg spotted a maintenance ladder leading up to a platform. This way! They climbed fast. Below, George appeared between the containers, gun in hand, face twisted with rage. He fired upward, bullets ripping through metal inches from Miriam's legs. Greg! She cried. Greg grabbed her wrist, pulling her onto the top platform. Ahead was a single narrow beam leading to the outer boundary. We cross here! Greg shouted. It's too thin! We have no choice. They ran across the beam. Halfway through, Greg turned back. George climbed after them, fury burning in his eyes. His voice echoed into the night. Gregory! I made you! Greg didn't slow. He shouted back, voice breaking with raw truth. You destroyed me! They reached the far end. Greg jumped down, helping Miriam land. George reached the middle of the beam. Greg grabbed a loose metal pipe from the ground. He hurled it upward. It struck the beam hard. George staggered and slipped. He dangled from the edge, fingers clawing the metal. Greg! George shouted, panic cracking through his control. Help me! Greg froze. Miriam stared, trembling. Greg, don't! George's voice broke into desperation. You're not a killer. You're not like me. Greg stepped closer to the beam. George's eyes filled with hope. Pull me up. Do it, Greg. Save me. Greg looked at him for a long silent moment. Then he said, voice low and deadly calm, "You're right. I'm nothing like you." He raised the pipe and slammed it down on George's fingers. George screamed and fell. The impact echoed through the yard. The monster who controlled everything lay broken and unmoving on cold concrete. Miriam covered her mouth. Greg stood frozen. The night wind hissed through the containers. After a long moment, Miriam touched Greg's hand gently. "It's over." Greg shook his head slowly. "No," he whispered. "Not yet." He looked at George's lifeless body. "At dawn, the world learns the truth." They walked into the night. The eastern sky was beginning to soften into pale gray by the time Greg and Miriam reached the outskirts of the industrial district. They walked in silence, exhausted, clothes stained with dirt and sweat, but each step felt lighter, as if the weight of years was slowly falling away. A lone taxi slowed when Greg raised a hand. The driver hesitated when he saw the state they were in. Greg held up his hands. "Please, we're not criminals. We just need to get to the city." The driver studied them for a moment, then nodded. "Get in." They climbed into the back, heads falling against the seat. The city lights glimmered ahead like a promise. Miriam finally spoke, her voice soft and shaky. "Greg, what happens now?" Greg stared at his reflection in the window. The bruises, the sadness, the determination. "Now," he said, "we expose everything." She nodded. "You think Alfred—" Greg swallowed. "I don't know if he made it, but he bought us time. That has to mean something." They drove toward the city center. As the sun rose, Greg felt the clarity that comes with dawn, a quiet, almost painful honesty. For the first time in years, he wasn't running from shadows. He was stepping into the light. When they arrived at the city square, Greg paid the driver, and he and Miriam walked straight to the towering granite steps of the National Anti-Corruption Bureau. The guards at the entrance stiffened as they approached. "Sir, can we help?" "Yes," Greg said firmly. "I have evidence. Crimes committed by George Campbell, CEO of Genco Maritime. Financial fraud, money laundering, embezzlement, attempted murder." The guards exchanged bewildered glances. Miriam raised her chin. "And we have documents, recordings, and witnesses." They were escorted inside immediately. Hours passed. Greg and Miriam sat in a crowded interview room, watched as investigators tore through the files he'd saved, replayed Alfred's audio confession, and analyzed the footage from the USB. By noon, the room was buzzing. By evening, Genco Maritime's accounts were frozen, board members detained, the media flooded with breaking news, and George Campbell's entire empire began collapsing like a rotten structure finally kicked at the foundation. Greg and Miriam stood at the edge of the plaza as reporters swarmed outside the bureau building. One journalist pointed toward Greg. "Sir, is it true you were framed? Are you the whistleblower?" Greg's throat tightened. People listened. People believed him. "Yes," he said softly. "I was framed, but I'm done being silent." Miriam squeezed his hand, proud, emotional. A second reporter asked, "What about George Campbell? What happened to him?" Greg took a slow breath. "He fell," Greg said truthfully. "He fell the same way he built his empire, by stepping on the wrong people." A hush fell. The cameras flashed. Greg turned away from the crowd, walking down the steps with Miriam beside him. A chapter had closed. Another was beginning. As they reached the sidewalk, Miriam touched his arm. "So what will you do now?" Greg looked at the city skyline glowing under the evening sun. "I rebuild," he said. "This time on my terms." "And me?" she asked quietly. Greg smiled, genuinely, for the first time in years. "I hope you'll stay." Miriam breathed out softly, eyes glistening. "Then I will." They walked into the bustling street. 2 survivors, 2 witnesses, 2 people finally free. Behind them, the world swallowed the fall of George Campbell. Ahead of them, a new life waited, unbroken, unmanipulated, and finally their own. Gregory Hale, a loyal employee at Genco Maritime, receives a mysterious envelope from his boss, George Campbell, ordering him to complete a nearly impossible task in 48 hours. Soon, Greg discovers that the assignment is not work at all. It's the opening move in a scheme designed to ruin him. George frames Greg for multi-million-dollar fraud, forging documents and using Greg as the perfect scapegoat. With his career destroyed and his reputation in flames, Greg pairs up with Miriam, a former co-worker who knows pieces of the truth. Together, they trace George's secret operations, uncovering ghost warehouses, illegal shipments, hidden accounts, and falsified manifests. Every step forward reveals deeper betrayal, planned for years, engineered by George and executed with precision. At an abandoned customs warehouse, Greg learns the full truth through a leaked video. George had handpicked him years earlier strictly to take the fall when the company's crimes finally surfaced. The betrayal shatters Greg, but it hardens him too. George's auditor, Alfred, normally silent and loyal, unexpectedly switches sides, revealing George's plot to eliminate all evidence and all witnesses, including Greg himself. But mercenaries storm the warehouse, forcing Greg and Miriam into a desperate escape through hidden tunnels under the port. The chase ends at a shipping yard, where they come face to face with George. He fires Greg from the company as a symbolic execution, promising to wipe him off the map forever. But Alfred intervenes with gunfire, buying Greg and Miriam enough time to escape. When George pursues them up a narrow beam, Greg finally confronts the monster who destroyed his life. George hangs from the edge, begging for help, insisting Greg is not like him. Greg lets go, because saving a monster would mean dying like a victim. George falls, ending his reign of corruption. At dawn, Greg and Miriam report everything to the National Anti-Corruption Bureau. Evidence pours out: forged files, offshore accounts, recorded meetings, smuggling routes, and Alfred's confession. By evening, Genco Maritime collapses under federal investigation. Executives are detained. Accounts frozen. Headlines explode with Greg's story, the man who was framed but fought back. Greg chooses not revenge alone, but justice, rebuilding his life with Miriam beside him. He walks into the future with a clean name, a clear conscience, and a world that finally knows the truth.